box. Question answers, of course, our trainer may choose to answer the questions while the session or later in the session, but please do not disturb the session. This session will be recorded and we will be emailing you the recording of the session as well. So, so with this, our today's session is going to be conducted by Mr. Arif Irfanullah, who is the CEO IFD, which is one of a world famous tech provider of CFA program. Arif Saab himself is a qualified he has qualified as an engineer from Dartmouth, and he's an MBA from Chicago Booth Business School. So we're very happy to have you here. And Arif Saab, we want to thank you for your continued support for this program, and welcome to this session.
Thank you for having me.
This year we have, I think, 17 universities and 29 teams participating in this competition. So all the best to all the students, and we look forward to your best effort here. I will spend a little bit of time just to introduce the ecosystem. And let's begin with what is CFA, which is the Chartered Financial Analyst Program, which is conducted by a CFA Institute. Now, CFA Institute is a not-for-profit body based out of USA, which administers the CFA program. So they have a lot of professionals who actually create this program, and globally, this exam is taken by many professionals, and it is one of the largest, organizations of investment professionals, and a very prestigious one as well. So once you have done your CFA, you can become a member of CFA Institute, and CFA Institute have societies all over the world to serve people who have become members and who have done their CFA. And CFA Society Pakistan is one of the societies out of those 160 societies globally. You can see, within the membership, within the community, 57% are in the US, Americas rather, and the EMEA region, which is the Middle East and the Europe, is 22%, and Asia Pacific has 21%, which is the fastest growing region these days. Coming to CFA, that was about the CFA Institute, which actually is the global body. And now coming to their flagship CFA program, which is Chartered Financial Analyst Program. It is considered the gold standard in the industry and throughout the world. So anyone who has done their CFA sitting in Pakistan is no different than somebody who's doing their CFA in Canada, and they have a very high global mobility because you have this gold standard of that qualification, which is an international qualification, an international professional qualification. Now, CFA has 3 levels. The exam itself has 3 levels, and one is foundational. Second focuses on analytics of the securities, and third is on portfolio management and wealth management planning. Not only that you have to complete all these 3 levels of exams to get the CFA charter, you also have to have a certain amount of professional experience. So you have to have 4,000 hours of qualified professional work experience, and then you have to obtain 2-3 references for you to become a charter holder and obtain and become, and you can put the 3-letter CFA in front of your name. Coming to us, CFA Society Pakistan, we are a locally incorporated member society of CFA Institute, and we have a lot of members throughout the country who have done their completed the CFA and have now become our members. And we do a lot of things for our members. We do a lot of things for students as well. So I'll focus on what we do for you, which is, maybe you've heard of the CFA Institute Research Challenge. It's a global challenge which happens in all the societies, and they have steps where winners from one region move on to another region, and then there's a global winner which comes out, and it's a good 6 months process. It's a very popular research challenge. Ethics challenge is more for maybe some that is more for the students who are in their maybe penultimate year or like that. But an ethics challenge is where you can have students who are maybe in the 2nd or the 3rd semester as well of their business school, who can be part of this challenge. We also hold a lot of student sessions, career sessions, CFA program sessions, and guest speaker sessions with universities. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us. Connect with us on the Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media channels that usually exist. So we're there. Please try to follow us there. Now I'll come to the ethics challenge. Now, what is the ethics challenge? The purpose of ethics challenge is to introduce students to the ethics in the investment management profession. So it's not the law; it's your ethical framework which you need to understand, especially because in this profession you're using somebody else's money, and it's very important for you to have understand those parameters of fairness and transparency. So, how does it work? So, what will happen is that after I've introduced, Arif Saab will take you through the curriculum of ethics of CFA Institute, which is taught in the CFA program. And he will briefly take you through that framework. That framework has already been emailed to you, and by the end of the session or tomorrow morning, you will get a case study. That case study will you will have to map the violations which exist in that case and map it against the CF Institute Code of Ethics. You will have 11 days to analyze the case and then submit the violations along with the recommendations to us by the set time. If you're late, we will not accept your presentations. You will not put your names or university names on your presentation. You have to present it with a pseudo name. You can come up with any name and submit the presentation. We will have all of this session will on the 24th of January, we will have a session, an online session in which you will be presenting those your work that you've done to a panel of international judges and local judges and a very high profile CFA charter holder judges. And it will totally be a presentation format. You don't need to submit any reports. You will present for 10 minutes and there'll be 10 minutes Q&A session. You're all as required to participate and be ready for the questions from the judges. And those who win, the top 4 teams from those who win on the 24th will move on to the final round, which will be on 29th of January in Karachi. This evaluation sheet will be shared with you. This presentation will be shared with you. So you will have a broad idea on what will you be graded on. And there'll be some on marks allocated to the violations, some to the practicality of solutions that is you're presenting, the strength of the argument, the team involvement, how your team has gelled in and worked together. All of these things will matter. This is the timeline which has already been shared with you, but just to reiterate, you have to submit the case on the 21st and you have to be ready to present them on 24 January. And all the best, and we hope that you will do a great job at this. And with this, just one more thing. Last year, I would like to introduce the last year challenge winners. Were KSBL was the winner, and NED University was the runner-up. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I'd like to welcome Arif Saab to this session. And over to you, Arif Saab.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarwat, and assalamu alaikum to all the participants. I hope you're doing well, and inshallah, I look forward to a session where hopefully you will get some very beneficial information. So let me just share my version of the presentation. Okay, so if you can just confirm that you can see the presentation and that you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's start. Um, the first thing I'll just mention is that ethics seems like an easy area, but it's actually not that easy. There are, many things that are quite subjective, and because of that subjectivity, in the same sort of situation, different people can come up with sort of different answers about what's right and what's wrong. What we are going to learn in this session is that in the context of investment management, what is ethical behavior and what is unethical behavior. And the CFA Institute has done an incredibly good job of defining this. And that's what this challenge is about. I would argue that whether you go into investment management or not, the principles that you will learn here will be extremely valuable. So no matter what you do, as long as you try to apply these principles, and those of you who have a religious orientation will also notice an incredible overlap between the sorts of things that we are going to see here and what our religion teaches us anyway, right? So let's just start with what ethics means. Ethics, and just again, there is a lot of material to cover. And I'll just say upfront that obviously I will not be able to cover every single point on every single slide. My objective is going to be that you get the main points. And then we will also share detailed notes. So, as Sarvat mentioned, the organization that I lead, IFT, we create detailed content for the exam. So right now you will get a flavor, and we will cover some of the major points related to the ethics curriculum. But we will also share with you detailed notes. So I hope that through this presentation you will get a good sense. And then those of you who want to really, understand the concepts better can then study the notes. And then those of you who actually decide to participate in the CFA program and do the exams that Sarvat was talking about earlier, then you go even further with respect to learning this material. So coming back to our content now, since this course is on ethics, it makes sense to start with the definition of ethics. So the word ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, and we've often heard this word, but what does ethos mean? So ethos refers to character and our guiding beliefs, our ideals based on which we make decisions. So ethical principles or moral principles are the beliefs that provide guidance for our behavior. So, for example, it is a principle that dishonesty is a bad thing, and hopefully that then drives our behavior towards being honest. There are some widely acknowledged ethical principles, which include honesty that I just talked about, transparency. So when you are a professional, being transparent to others about what you are doing, fairness, justice, diligence. In other words, working hard, respect for the rights of others. So this is something even sort of in a sort of context of Pakistan or in our Islamic context, when we use the term ma'ruf, something that is well known. So that basically is what we are talking about here. So widely acknowledged is ma'ruf or well known. Anywhere in the world, these principles of honesty, transparency, fairness, respect for others, whether you are in a Christian land, Hindu land, Buddhist land, wherever you go, these are principles that are universally accepted and acknowledged and appreciated. Being considerate of the consequences of one's actions on others is also considered a part of ethical behavior, right? So, so obviously we learn that, anything, if we do something that causes harm to somebody else, obviously that's a bad thing. So we need to be considerate, whereby our actions are actually resulting in something good for other people and definitely not resulting in something that causes harm to others. Okay, so now all of you are coming to this session in a somewhat professional context. You are students, but you are on your journey towards becoming a professional. So let's just talk a little bit about professionalism and the importance of ethics in a professional context. So what is a professional? Before I go into investment management, which is one type of profession, let's just talk about professions that all of us are familiar with. So all of us are familiar with the medical profession. So whether we like it or not, we've interacted with doctors. So they represent a certain profession. Some of us might have interacted with lawyers or architects, so that's also a profession. So just take something that's easy that everybody can relate to, which is, say, the medical profession, and in particular, let's say doctors. So they have specialized knowledge and skills. They have a mission to serve society. So ideally, doctors should be serving society. They should uphold high ethical standards. And this is extremely important. If doctors do not do that, if doctors are not upholding high standards, then us being, we are all sort of people who need doctors. If doctors are not upholding high standards, then the whole profession will be viewed in a negative light. So if we lose our trust in doctors because they are not behaving ethically, then that causes harm not just to the medical profession but to all of society. So one of the themes that you will notice is that ethics is central with respect to any profession. So then the question is, how do professions establish trust? And then, there are several points related to that. So normalizing practitioner behavior, so setting the guidelines. So ideally, in every profession, to get that formal sort of qualification of being a lawyer or being a doctor, the profession needs to try and make sure that people are trained in ethics and that their behavior is in line with whatever the ethical standards are. People should be providing service to society, high entry standards. So all of you are business students, or most of you are business students. You've heard the term, high barriers to entry. So in any profession, which is, respected, it takes a lot of time, money, effort to sort of, become a professional. So to become a doctor, for example, there are many years of medical school, and then you do your residency or your house job, and then you become a sort of a practicing doctor. So basically, professions take people through this process, and hopefully, ideally, in taking people through this process, the ethical values also need to be inculcated. Now, unfortunately, when we see in our society, for example, that that's not happening, just because something is not happening doesn't mean that, as in, doesn't mean that it should not happen. So here I'm a teacher, and my job is to tell you, what the right thing is. And hopefully, one of the reasons I do this exercise is I just want to encourage all my students to do well in whatever they are doing. But one of the things that I keep emphasizing is the importance of good ethical behavior, because regardless of where you go, this is the most important thing. You can be a great doctor, but if you are not ethical, then actually you are causing more harm than good. And in this context, if we move on to, let's say, investment management. So in investment management, like in any other profession, good ethical behavior is essential. And you will be able to, read this on your own when I share the notes with you. So I'll just, talk through the main points so that you understand the key concept. Just to understand the importance of ethics and trust in the context of investment management. So as actually Sarvat mentioned in a brief introduction, when you are in the investment management profession, you are working with other people's money. So people give you money. So I'm imagining here, or let's all of us imagine that we are investment managers, which means that
उसमें
people give us their
उसमें
money.
आरिफ और फानुला ऊपर आ रहे हैं, डबल डबल पिक्चर आ रही.
Okay, Sarvat,
Sorry.
I think you need to mute yourself. Okay. Okay. So, where was I? Okay. So, yeah. So, So, imagine you are all investment managers. People are giving you their money to invest. If you do not have an ethical reputation, so if people cannot trust you, then what will happen? Will people still give you money? Obviously not, right? So in any environment, if the trust is not established, then that particular industry or that profession will be heavily compromised. And that will be a loss for all of society, because if people are reluctant to invest their money, they are reluctant to give it to you, they are sending it in some other market, then that's bad for all of us. So that means that building trust is essential. And to build trust, one has to act in an ethical way. So one has to not only be ethical, but one also has to be perceived as being ethical. And obviously, when that happens, then there are immense benefits to society. And the CFA Institute recognizes this. The CFA Institute, as was mentioned earlier, is the largest body for investment management professionals. And one of the major aims of the CFA Institute is to promote the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence. And notice here, ethics comes first, because without ethics, this whole profession will be compromised. Okay. So the rest of the things you can actually see over here. So the CFA Institute actually requires that candidates adhere to the code and standards and aim and to sign annually a statement attesting to that continued adherence. And what does this code and standards mean? I will get into this shortly. Okay, challenges to ethical conduct. So behaving in an ethical manner is not always easy, right? So what are the challenges? People believe they are more ethical than they actually are. So if I were to ask each one of you individually, are you ethical? On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is super ethical and 1 is like completely not ethical, I would guess that most of us would, we would rate ourselves closer to 10. We'd say we are 7, 8, or 9, right? But then when we look at society, if I then say, okay, now look at society, and I ask you how ethical is our society, then the answer will be closer to, say, 1, 2, or 3, right? So we don't have time right now. Otherwise, we could have actually, tested this out. But just based on prior experiences, I'm sharing with you the sorts of scores that we would most likely see. So that creates a problem, right? Because if everybody thinks they are more ethical than average, but we are actually quite unethical, that poses a problem. So this is one thing. Another thing is that decision makers often fail to recognize, or people tend to significantly underestimate the effect of situational influences. So what do we mean by situational influences? These are external factors that shape our thinking, our decision making, and behavior. Now, if you have interacted with sort of people in the workforce in different sort of walks of life, you will notice that there are all these external pressures. For example, unfortunately, there is this pressure that we need to make money, that we need to do something that has prestige, and then to do these things we often justify unethical behavior. So, for example, just to give a very, basic example, a policeman who sort of takes a bribe from you will justify that behavior by saying that, I need to feed my family, right? So many people start, using their situation and circumstances to justify their unethical behavior. Sometimes within companies, like within, again, as I mentioned earlier, the healthcare industry, and some of you might be familiar with this, but there might be some unethical practices where pharmaceutical companies ask their sales representatives to meet certain targets, and then to meet those targets, sales representatives might effectively be bribing doctors to prescribe their drugs, right? So, and then all of that is justified in terms of this is our culture, or this is what we need to do, right? So these are things that we see around us, and the people who are immersed in that culture or that environment sometimes don't even see unethical behavior as being unethical. So, and the failure to recognize these challenges or these situations can lead us to unethical behavior. And one of the things that we learn in this short workshop, and then hopefully as you study this further, is if we can understand how to step out of the situation and evaluate the situation from the outside, then hopefully we can recognize what's ethical and unethical, and then hopefully make the correct decisions. And we'll talk about that framework in a short while. Okay, another thing that you need to keep in mind is ethical versus legal, right? Now, ideally, what is legal should be ethical, and which is this bottom left quadrant. So ideally, what is legal should also be ethical, and ideally, what is not legal should not be ethical, right? So, for example, legal and ethical, or let's just say not legal and not ethical. So stealing is not legal and it's not ethical either, right? Trying to being honest and having contracts that are clearly stating, that are not misleading. So that's the legal thing to do, and that's also the ethical thing to do. So between these two, this is what we normally hope for, and hopefully our lawmakers create laws that are ethical, right? But this is not always the case. Something could be legal but not necessarily ethical. So an example is, let's say, and in this session, maybe some of my biases will come through, but I will take the liberty anyway just to get the point across. So is selling cigarettes. So let's say I know that cigarettes cause harm. And how do I know that? As in the cigarette, the packet itself says that cigarettes can kill. And yet yet my job is to go and, aggressively sell cigarettes, make sure that, all the sort of retail outlets that I'm dealing with need to be stocked with, with the cigarettes from my company. So is that legal? Yes, it's legal. But is that ethical? I would argue that that's not ethical. So that's just one example. So recognizing, so now in the context of this ethics challenge, we are not talking about legal or not legal. We are talking about what is ethical. The other one is slightly more tricky. What's not legal but ethical, right? So you might be living in a country where, let's say, honestly protesting for something that is good is not allowed. So you are living, let's say, in an authoritarian regime that does not allow dissent, and then you stand up for the rights of some oppressed group or community, right? Which is the right thing to do, or which is the ethical thing to do. So that would be ethical, but in the context of, where you are, for example, that might not be legal. So hopefully, that highlights the point that legal and ethical, while generally and ideally overlap significantly, but there are always areas where, what they will probably be areas where things are legal but not ethical, and there will be areas where things are ethical but not legal. Okay. Okay, now what do we need to do? Ideally, organizations should develop a strong ethical culture. So I know most of you are like students, and inshallah, at some point you'll go start working and then you'll become senior people in your organization. If your moral compass is well set now and you have a strong sense of ethics, then as you grow in your organizations, then these are the things that you should do. You should try and develop a strong ethical culture, encourage an investment professional's natural desire to do the right thing. So, right, by nature, we want to do the right thing. Even a young child, when he or she sees something unfair, will say this is not fair. A child knows that dishonesty is a bad thing, right? So doing the right thing is natural in us, but unfortunately, because of environmental pressures and other situations, we deviate from that. And our job actually is to try and come back to our nature. So in our religious context, we say that fitra, our nature or our natural state is to be ethical. And that's what we want to try and accomplish. So here is a framework that will be useful not just in your ethics challenge, but also in your life. So, how do you go through this ethical decision-making process? So, the first thing is whenever you are facing a situation where there is a potential ethical dilemma, and that will happen in the case that you receive, what do? You try and first of all identify the problem, right? So look at the relevant facts, that are given to you. Look at what are the different opinions, judgments, any biases that might exist. So you look at that. Then you consider the situational influences that I talked about, that, the person who is making an ethical decision, what are the situations that are influencing his or her thought process. You look for any additional guidance. You look at what are the possible alternate actions. So, based on all that, you then decide, okay, what's the ethical thing to do? What's the unethical thing to do? And then act. And then over time, you should also reflect, because sometimes you make a decision and then obviously the consequences come later. So intelligent people always look at the consequences of their actions and then reflect and then obviously learn. We learn from our mistakes, and then hopefully as we grow, we will always make mistakes, but intelligent people don't repeat the same mistakes. And those intelligent people are the ones who reflect on the past and then take corrective action. Okay, so after having set this general context, now I will talk about the code of ethics and then we'll talk about the standards. So earlier, when I was just talking about the CFA Institute and the CFA Institute promoting the code and standards. So when we say code, this is what we are talking about. We are talking about the code of ethics. Okay, now what does that mean? The code of ethics refers to 6 guiding principles related to ethics that the CFA Institute has put forward. And then, so basically, you can think of this code as the high level direction, right? So, based on this high level direction or the high level view related to ethics, then from this, we get to the standards. The standards are sort of the detailed guidelines on what to do, what not to do, what's right, what's wrong, and so on. But obviously, before we get into the details, first we need to understand the principles. And the principles are articulated here. There are 6 principles. The first one is, and this is now referring to people who are CFA charter holders, so people who have gone through the exams and they have the relevant work experience and now they are charter holders. Or it also refers to people who sign up for the exam. So the moment you sign up for an exam, you become a candidate. And candidates are also responsible for upholding the code and the standards. And what I would say to all of you, given that you are going to participate in this challenge. So you basically imagine that you are investment managers, because your whole case will be related to investment management. Your cases will obviously not be related to medicine or law, it will be related to investment management. So I want you to imagine that you are an investment manager and that that all the code, the things that we are talking about, I want you to imagine that these all apply to you. All right. So sort of those of you who seen science fiction and so on, there's this concept of prime directive. What basically the core things that you need to do. So the first one, you must act with integrity, competence, diligence, and respect, and you must act in an ethical manner with the public, with the clients, with prospective clients, employers, employees, colleagues in the investment profession, and other participants in the global capital markets, right? So this is a heavy statement, and you can think that the standards that we'll talk about later will sort of unpack the intensity that you see over here. But basically, this is saying that you must act in a good way with everyone, right? In simple terms, that's what this is saying. Next, you must place the integrity of the investment profession and the interests of others, interests of clients, above your own personal interests, right? So this is what we learn, that if there is something that I can do for the better of society, I should do that. So the interests of others should be placed before my own self-interest. We should use reasonable care and exercise independent professional judgment when conducting investment analysis, making investment recommendations, taking investment actions, and engaging in other professional activities. So, this concept of independent professional judgment, obviously, we'll see in detail later what this means. But if I were to connect this with what we've already talked about, I mentioned situational influences, right? So we tend to be influenced by our environment. I might be influenced by a boss who wants me to do something unethical so that we can make more money, so that the boss can get a bigger bonus. So my job as a professional, is to use my independent judgment, do the right thing, and avoid being influenced by all these external factors that might actually be pushing me in the wrong direction or in a direction that serves somebody else's interests. We should practice and encourage others to practice in a professional and ethical manner that will reflect credit on themselves and the profession. So, here again is another principle. Obviously, not only am I supposed to do the right thing, I am also supposed to encourage others to do the right thing, because obviously we don't act in isolation. We are always acting with others. If I work in a company with five other professionals, if I'm the only good person, but everybody else is not doing the right thing, at the very least, I should be encouraging my colleagues and those around me to also do the right thing. We should promote the integrity and viability of the global capital markets for the ultimate benefit of society. So, this connects with the concept of trust that I talked about earlier. So, if people lose trust in the investment industry, then everybody loses, because even if, let's say, I'm honest individually, but the reputation of the investment industry is tarnished, then all of us lose out. And therefore, I should do whatever I can, not just to be, not just to act in a good way myself, but I should also promote or do whatever I can to promote the integrity of the capital markets and of my profession in general. And finally, I must maintain and improve my professional competence and strive to maintain and improve the competence of other investment professionals. So, this is the concept that we should always be trying to improve ourselves. Obviously, the world is changing. All of you recognize that, let's say, in the recent past, artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly important. So, if I am an investment professional and I do not understand how artificial intelligence can be used in my field, then in a way, I am not I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do as a professional. As a professional, I should stay, if I'm advising people on how to manage their money, I need to be aware of the latest trends and the latest tools and techniques that will help me serve my clients better. Okay, so that's the code. And as I mentioned, the code is high level direction, it's the ethos that is behind the standards. The standards, as you'll see now, are much more detailed. And this slide gives you a high level view of the 7 standards. So, professionalism, integrity of capital markets, duties to clients, and so on. So, these are the 7 standards. And under each standard, there are substandards, and then there is information related to those substandards. Obviously, in this presentation, you can't learn everything, but what I will try to do is give you the main points, and then hopefully, if you also then study the notes that you will get along with this, then when you get your case you will be able to try and identify the violations, because in the case, you will then have to try and figure out what standard is being violated and so on. Okay, so out of the seven standards, the first standard is professionalism. And as I mentioned, with professionalism, we have four sub-standards. So standard 1A is knowledge of the law, 1B is independence and objectivity, and so on. So now we are going to take each standard, understand what that standard is, and then we will look at some guidance related to that standard, and then, what are the recommended procedures. But as I mentioned before, we just don't have the time to read every single thing. So for every standard, I will give you the main point so that you understand what that standard is about. Then with respect to examples and, details on what we can do with respect to that standard, that you will see in the notes. So the first standard is knowledge of the law. Okay, so what does knowledge of the law means? This is standard 1A, knowledge of the law. Remember, standard 1 was professionalism. Under professionalism, the first substandard A is knowledge of the law. So in sort of the CFA Institute world, that's written as 1A, knowledge of the law. So what is this standard? The standard says that members and candidates, and now let's just imagine that we are all candidates. So we must understand and comply with all applicable laws, rules, and regulations of any government, regulatory organization, licensing agency, or professional association governing their professional activities. In the event of conflict, members and candidates must comply with the more strict law, rule, or regulation. Members and candidates must not knowingly participate or assist in, and must disassociate from any violation of such rules, laws, or regulations. Okay, so what's the point here? The point is that as investment management professionals, we must know what the law is, especially in the context of investment management. So in our country, the regulatory authority is the SECP, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. So when we are in this field, let's say we are helping people with their sort of investment actions, we are buying stock, we are selling securities, and so on and so forth. So we need to understand what the rules are. So for example, if there are rules against insider trading, for example, or rules against front running, and these are terms that we will see through this presentation, but I'm just saying that there are rules and regulations, and we as investment management professionals need to understand those rules and regulations. We can't say that, okay, as in sometimes, as children, as in if there are some house rules, or even in school sometimes, we might break a rule and then sort of plead ignorance. We might say that, oh, I'm sorry, I did not know that. As in, I was not supposed to walk into a certain classroom. I accidentally walked into the classroom and I was taken to the principal. And then I say to the principal, sorry, sir, I did not know that. And maybe the principal will forgive me. But in this world, the world of investment management, that's not an excuse. So ignorance of the law is not an excuse. As professionals, so one of the basic points of being a professional is that I need to know the laws, the rules, the regulations that are supposed to govern my professional conduct. So that's one key point. So that's why the recommended procedure is stay informed. You need to know about new rules that are coming out. The second point is that we, in this context, not only are investment professionals, but I've said that we are also, part of the CFA program. So the code of conduct that we are talking about here, the code of ethics, and then the standards apply to us. So what if there is a conflict between the standard that we are studying here as part of the CFA program and a particular law? What are we supposed to do? And the answer is that you are supposed to follow the stricter version. So if the law is stricter than the code and standards from the CFA Institute, then you follow the law. On the other hand, if the law is vague on something, let's say you are in a country where, for some strange reason, insider trading is allowed, but CFA Institute code and standards clearly prohibit that, then you are supposed to follow the stricter version, which is that you are not allowed to do insider trading. Since all of you are still young and you can probably relate, but so with our kids, kids sometimes, have obviously kids generally, hopefully have, a father and a mother. So both are alive and both are sometimes not on the same page. Father says X, mother says Y. So in our household, the rule is for the kids that when there is a conflict between what the two parents are saying, then follow the stricter rule. Right? That way things are covered. So same thing over here. If there are two separate things, you follow the stricter version. Okay, then as I mentioned, there is lots of information that you can see in the notes that you will get, inshallah. Okay, standard 1B is independence and objectivity. And if you remember in the code, the code of ethics, there was this idea that you need to be independent and you need to be objective. So what does that mean? This means that you must use reasonable care and judgment to achieve and maintain independence and objectivity in your professional activities. You must not offer, solicit, or accept any gift, any benefit, any compensation that reasonably could be expected to compromise your independence and objectivity, or even compromise somebody else's independence and objectivity. Okay, so I'll just give you a few examples to illustrate this. Okay, let's say that you work as a research analyst at a large brokerage firm, and let's say that you are writing a research report on a large pharmaceutical company. Okay, uh, I will avoid taking names just to be safe, but let's just say XYZ pharmaceutical company. Okay, now your research goes to buy side clients. So, buy side clients are basically clients who actually purchase securities. Let's say there is a mutual fund, right? So in our context, let's say Al Mizan, for example, is a very large mutual fund company. There are UBL funds and many others internationally. You can have basically large mutual funds. So those funds are buying securities, buying stocks. So they are called buy side clients. The research that you are writing is being used by these buy side clients. So let's say that you have a buy side client who uses your research, and based on past recommendations, your buy side client has invested heavily in XYZ pharmaceutical company. Okay. So a significant part of their portfolio is XYZ pharmaceutical company. Now, when you have large investments, it's not so easy to quickly, buy and sell. And and the buy side client knows that you are going to release a research report on XYZ company. And let's say that you are a very popular research analyst, and whatever recommendations that you make in your research report are basically noticed in the industry. So when you give a buy recommendation on a given stock, then that's taken favorably and the stock price goes up. And if you make a sell recommendation on a given security, then given that people trust your work and they have high confidence in your ability and your sort of research sense, when you issue a sell recommendation, then the stock price goes down. Okay, so in this situation, it is quite possible that the client of yours might try to influence your independence and objectivity. They might offer you something, might offer you gifts or send you gifts, or say that you and your family are getting a sort of free vacation somewhere in the world, where their actual objective is to influence you to issue a recommendation that is aligned with what they want. So they would want you to issue a positive recommendation because that would help their fund. Now, what are you supposed to do here, right? You are supposed to not accept any gifts or any favors because that is likely to compromise your objectivity. You are supposed to, when you issue a sort of a recommendation, or your report will be there, the recommendation will be there, that should be independent and objective. Independent in the sense that it should not be biased, it should not depend on any pressure that any other entity is putting on you. It should be objective in the sense that it should be based on the actual facts related to that particular company. It should not be biased based on the influence or the pressure that's being put on you. Okay, so in many ways, this is obvious, but when people are actually in the industry and doing their work, then there are so many pressures and biases and people trying to influence you that and these are basically the sort of the situational influences. Sometimes they become so strong that our judgment becomes clouded. In other words, our independence is compromised and our objectivity is compromised. But what we are learning here is that if our independence and objectivity is compromised, then that is a violation of the code and standards. And these are the sorts of things that might show up on your case, where you are given a scenario where somebody is an analyst and they are writing a research report, and then there are certain, like even the pharmaceutical company itself might pressure you to write a positive report, or people who own that stock in large numbers or large volumes might try to influence you. But if they are, and then you do get influenced, then that is a violation, and this is the technical term used, then that would be a violation of standard 1B, independence and objectivity. Okay, so that's standard 1B. And then, as I mentioned, there are all these recommended procedures also. Okay, now just to, on this slide, what I've done is, just given you a snapshot from the notes that I referred to earlier, because, sometimes when you are, attending a session like this, you might think that, okay, the instructor is not taking me through every single point. And one reason for that is if I were to go through every single point, we would not finish on time. The second reason is if I go into details, then you might miss the bigger picture. But what I've done is just shown a quick snapshot from the notes. So, for example, here in the slides, you will notice, okay, this is independence and objectivity. Under guidance, what do we mean by buy-side clients? And then here, you will actually see that in the notes, things are given in detail. So you can obviously read this later, but the sort of example that I talked about is then explained over here. Okay, standard 1C is misrepresentation. Members and clients must not knowingly make any misrepresentations relating to investment analysis, recommendations, actions, or other professional activities. So, a misrepresentation is any untrue statement or omission of fact or any statement that is otherwise false or misleading. Okay, so let me just give you an example. You work for a mutual fund now, and you want to encourage others to sort of buy shares or to invest in your mutual fund. And your mutual fund has done very well over the last 2 years, but before that, let's say the 3 years before that, the fund performed quite poorly. So you go to potential clients or potential investors and you just talk about the last 2 years. You say that over the last 2 years, we've had a 60%, growth. We've done phenomenally well. And you basically just focus on the last 2 years, which were good. So strictly speaking, you are not lying, but your statements are misleading. You are not mentioning the fact that the 3 years prior to that were actually maybe, minus 50% or, some terrible losses. So you are only picking and choosing the information that is sort of painting you in a positive light, and you are omitting things that are very relevant for your potential audience. They should also know what happened before that, right? So they should have a bigger picture. But you are only giving a limited picture to serve your own purpose, right? So this is an example of misrepresentation, right? So it can happen in performance reporting sometimes. Uh, Even plagiarism is an example, right? So plagiarism basically means that you are taking somebody else's work and presenting it as your own, right? So these are all examples of misrepresentation. And if somebody is doing misrepresentation, then they would be violating standard 1C. Okay. Okay. Next is misconduct. So this is even more severe. So members and candidates must not engage in any conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or commit any act that reflects adversely on their professional reputation, integrity, or competence. So the example that I just gave you, like strictly speaking, that was not being dishonest because I was just reporting, let's say, the last 2 years worth of returns, and I actually did well in the last 2 years. So I wasn't being dishonest. But I was misleading because I was omitting certain important things. In misconduct, this is like blatantly being dishonest or fraud, right? So I'm taking money from people and then just putting that into my own bank account. Or I am reporting performance numbers that are actually not true. So I'm saying that I did well over the last 2 years, or I say that I did well over the last 5 years, but my returns over the last 5 years were actually negative. So any act that involves lying, cheating, stealing, so things that are like absolutely blatantly and obviously wrong, that falls under misconduct. And I hope you realize this, that when misconduct happens, not only are you hurting yourself, but you are also hurting your organization. And some of you might be, let's say, sports fans. Let's say, unfortunately, I don't know, many of you might not be old enough to remember this, but in 2010, there were some Pakistani cricketers who were dishonest, right? So through that dishonesty, not only did they hurt themselves, they also hurt the reputation of their team. And by extension, they also hurt the reputation of their whole country, right? So the same thing here. When people do something, like if somebody at IBA, for example, does something wrong, they engage in some bad conduct, they are hurting themselves, but they also hurt the institution that they belong to. Because when the newspapers report it, they will say, okay, so these students from IBA did XYZ, right? So we need to recognize that the implications and the repercussions of any misconduct that we do go far beyond our individual selves. They impact, whatever organization or whatever profession that we are associated with. Okay. So um, so we are done with the first standard. So remember, standard one was professionalism, and under professionalism, we talked about four substandards. Now we move on to standard two, which is integrity of capital markets, and here again there are substandards. But with standard two, integrity of capital markets, there are only two substandards. So here, just to, I've been talking nonstop for almost 45 minutes. Our break is at 4:30. I'll just pause for a moment just to, just to check whether you are understanding, and if there is any, are there any quick questions? Please ask right now, or some things that you didn't understand. or if you think I'm going too fast or too slow, I'll just pause, take a sip of water while, you can just, somebody wants to speak up, you can speak up, or if you want to type anything, you can do that. Okay, so maybe you can just, if you can just confirm to me, maybe you can all just type it out as in, are you following what I'm talking about? Maybe on the chat, you can just, I want to make it slightly interactive so that okay. Okay, so I see some of you typing. Okay. All right. So people in general seem to be with the program. All right. Okay. That gives me energy to proceed. Okay, thanks. Okay, good. You can stop typing now. All right, thank you. I will continue. Yeah, we obviously can't keep this too interactive because then we will not finish. All right, next is integrity of capital markets. Okay, so two substandards. The first one is material non-public information. So members and candidates who possess material non-public information that could affect the value of an investment must not act or cause others to act on that information. Okay, so obviously the question is, what do we mean by material non-public information? Um, and we will cover that. Okay, so material information, so obviously material non-public information, right? So there are two key words here. The first is material and the other is non-public. So material information, so what is material information? Material information is any information that if you have that information, it gives you some material benefit. So for example, let's say that your uncle is the CFO of a large company like Engro, right, which is publicly traded. Lots of people buy and sell, Engro stock, right? Now, those of you who are somewhat familiar with this whole industry know that every quarter companies release their financials, right? So they release, okay, what was the performance in the last quarter? And if the performance is better than expected, then the stock goes up because people have set, there's a certain stock price based on what was expected. If the results or the announcement is better than expected, then price goes up. Now, having that information that our performance is better than what the market expects, so that is material information because this information can actually help me. If I buy the stock, I will make money. There will be a material benefit to me. Okay, what is non-public? Non-public means that it's not yet been released to the public, and that's why I said that your uncle is the CFO. Obviously, the CFO knows what the last quarter's performance is before the rest of the world knows, before it's announced, before it's made public. So, in that sense, before this important information is made public, before that, it's non-public. Only a few key people have that information. So the point is that if somebody, that CFO, let's say, tells you that, okay, we are going to release our numbers in 2 days, and guess what? Our performance is going to be much better than what the market expects. Okay, and then think that you want to be extra smart, so you go and buy that stock, right? Because you know that once the numbers are announced, the stock price will go up and you will make some money, right? But this is not ethical. This is not fair. This is not right because you are acting on material, non-public information. And the uncle who gave you that information is also not doing the right thing because he caused others, in this case you, to act on that information. Okay, so this is material, non-public information. Acting on it is not allowed, and even in Pakistan, SECP prohibits this. And when people are caught if people are caught acting on material non-public information, there is significant sort of punishment for them. Now, you might wonder what's wrong, right? As in, what's wrong with this? You've not killed anybody. It appears you might think that you've not hurt anybody. But if you think about it more deeply, you actually have caused a lot of harm. If people are acting on this, there is indeed harm. And I'll try and explain, because what I want in this session, if you can understand some of the underlying principles, then the details will will start making sense to you. So if I were to say to you, let's take something that's more easy to understand. So many of you, as you start your work, let's say you are buying a used motorcycle or a used car, and the person sell and you realize that the person selling something to you knows more than you, right? So the car might have some defects or might have some issues that they know, they have that information, but you don't. So would you like to buy from somebody who knows more than you? The answer is no, because when two people are engaging in a transaction and one person knows more than the other person, then that is inherently unfair, right? And when something is, if you believe that the market is unfair, then you will not participate in that market. So if in a given environment, in a given, let's say, security market, it becomes known that people are trading based on material non-public information, then all those who do not have the material non-public information will avoid that market. They would not want to participate in that capital market, in that securities market. And when people stop participating in the market, then the whole market loses, because then this whole idea of having a market where people buy and sell freely and happily, right, that will stop happening, because trust is lost, right? When people are operating based on non-public information, the trust is lost. When trust is lost, then the whole market, the integrity of the capital markets is lost. If you recall, one of the principles in our code of ethics was to uphold the integrity of capital markets. When people do things or take action based on non-public material non-public information, then they are actually violating the integrity of capital markets, and that is why this is such a bad thing. Okay, now I'm not sure on your ethics challenge whether you will get into what's called the mosaic theory, but it's a popular question, at least on the CFA exam. Okay, so if I give you a scenario, I don't know how familiar you are with the investment world, but when there are mergers and acquisitions, one company buys another company, then often uh, once the merger is announced, then the company that's being acquired, the smaller company, that stock price tends to go up, because people think that, okay, the smaller company is being bought out, the bigger company is going to pay significantly for the smaller company, so the smaller company stock is going to go up, right? So that normally happens. It doesn't always happen, but that normally happens. So if you can find out before the announcement that big company called B is going to acquire small company called S, if you can find out before it's announced, and you buy shares of small company, then once the announcement is made, small company stock will go up and you will benefit. Okay, so obviously, if you get that insider information, the CEO of small company is your relative and he tells you about this and you buy, that's wrong, because that's material non-public information. On the other hand, if you are an analyst in this industry and you look at big company, you look at small company, and you basically realize that actually, from a strategic perspective, it makes sense for big company to buy small company. So it's not being announced. It's just that you are speculating that this might be. That this might be a useful, as in this might be a good merger. And then you happen to be at a fancy restaurant and you happen to see that next to you, the CEO of big company is having lunch with the CEO of small company, right? So this is actually, that lunch is sort of in a way happening in public, and you just happen to see these two gentlemen having lunch together. And then you put two and two together. Your earlier analysis was that it does make sense for this merger to take place. And then you see these two gentlemen sort of having lunch, and sort of you can't exactly hear what they're saying, but you can see that sort of a very intense business conversation is taking place. And then you basically put this together. A mosaic is basically where you put like separate things together. So you put the separate pieces of information together and you conclude that most likely a merger is going to take place, and then you buy shares of small company. So according to the CFA Code of Standards, that is okay, right? Because you didn't actually have any material non-public information, right? You just used your own analysis, and then you happen to see something in public, and then you use your judgment. So when you do something like this and make decisions based on this, putting different pieces together, that actually is a combination of your intelligence and your good luck. And when you put these things together, and you come up with a theory, that's called the mosaic theory. And making money based on mosaic theory is okay according to the CFA Institute Code and Standards. Okay, hopefully that made sense. Okay, next one is market manipulation. So members and candidates must not engage in practices that distort prices or artificially inflate trading volume with the intent to mislead market participants. Okay, now here again, a little bit of finance and investment theory is needed to understand this point, but I'll try and make it very simple. Uh, I'm sure you can realize that there are many factors that go into the price of a given stock or security. So besides the obvious, which have to do with how well a given company is doing, what their profits are, and so on, stocks that are more liquid. Liquid means that lots of people are buying and selling that stock. Versus illiquid is a stock that's not so popular. It's not being bought and sold so much. So all else equal, liquid stocks tend to have a higher price than not so liquid stocks. And again, liquidity means in this context how easily stocks are bought and sold. In other words, stocks with higher trading volumes tend to be more liquid, are more liquid, and therefore all else equal are more valuable. Okay, now let's say that we have a brokerage firm with offices in two different cities. One office in Lahore, one office in let's say Karachi, and they want to and they own stock X, which is not very liquid, but to basically manipulate the market and give the impression that the market is for this stock is volumes are high, so they come up with a scheme that we'll have the Lahore office one day selling the shares and the Karachi office buying, and then the next day we will just reverse. And people obviously who are looking at trading volumes, they don't see who's buying and selling. They will just see that a lot of buying and selling is happening for this particular share. And they will assume that this is actually quite liquid. Lots of buying and selling is happening. So the brokerage firm that's actually doing this is violating the code and standards. They are basically engaging in what's called transaction-based manipulation, right? So they are manipulating the market, and this is a complete violation of the code and standards. Or if somebody is manipulating based on false information or partial information, then that also is not allowed. That is a violation of standard 2B, which we have just talked about. Okay, then we move to standard 3, which has to do with duties to clients, and this is quite important. Notice that there are five substandards here. In the investment world, you are obviously serving clients, right? And you are taking money from clients and either buying stocks or creating the portfolio or doing something for them, right? So we have an we as the investment management professionals have certain duties towards our clients. And standard three talks about different aspect of our duties to our clients. Okay, the first one is loyalty, prudence, and care. Members and candidates have a duty of loyalty to their clients and must act with reasonable care and exercise prudent judgment. Members and candidates must act for the benefit of their clients and place their clients' interests before their employer's interests and also before their own interests. So, this is a crucial point that if we were to create a pecking order, the most important thing is we look at the interest of our clients. And then after that, we look at the interest of our employer. And at the end, we look at our own personal interest. Okay, so I'll give you a few simple examples. Let's say, and I'll actually give you a very sort of a personal example. Sometimes, the bank that you go to might also have a mutual fund. So I obviously won't name the bank, but there was this bank that I went to, and my bank manager was aggressively trying to sell me the investment products of that particular bank. So the bank had launched some like mutual funds or some savings oriented products, and the manager over there was trying to sell me those those that product, right? That investment product. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is that the bank does not know what my situation is. The bank does not know what other investment options I have, what is suitable for me, what is not suitable for me. So rather than being loyal to me, the client, the bank, that person probably, as in that person would probably get a commission for selling. So he was looking at his own interest. Uh, his organization would be happy with him for selling that product. So he was basically looking at the best interest of his organization, his bank, his own self interest. And my interest was at the end because he was recommending something to me without knowing whether that product would suit me or not. So, in other words, the loyalty towards the client was not there. Prudence refers to, doing basically the right, sensible thing for your client. That was not there. So basically, this is an example. The example I just gave you would be a violation of loyalty, prudence, and care. So in your research challenge, if you see a situation where a person is acting, does not have the best interest of the client in mind and is looking at the best interest of his or her organization or his or her personal interest, then that is a problem. That would be a violation of Standard 3A. Okay. Fair dealing. Members and candidates must deal fairly and objectively with all clients when providing investment analysis, making investment recommendations, taking investment action, or engaging in other professional activities. So, obviously, in the investment world, we might have multiple clients and we need to deal fairly and objectively with all our clients. Okay, I'll go back to a scenario that I discussed earlier. Let's say that you are this, high profile, research analyst. You are the star of your industry. in the sense that when you write a research report and you make recommendations, then people take your recommendations very seriously. If you give a buy recommendation, then people start buying and the stock price goes up. If you make a sell recommendation, then people start selling that stock and the price goes down. And you recognize that you are a mover and shaker, in the sense that what you say actually moves and shakes the market. Okay, now because you're so good at this, you have many different clients. You have some clients that are bigger clients who invest more with you, and let's say you are closer to them. Perhaps you have stronger relationship. You maybe sort of have meals with them, or even have sort of personal connections with them. And then there are other clients who are not so close to you. Now, you complete your research report on, let's say, on Monday, and before releasing it to everybody else, you release it to your 5 most special clients so that they can benefit from this. And then a day later, you release it to everybody else. Okay, what you have done actually is you have violated standard 3B. Why? Because you have not dealt fairly with all your clients. The 5 sort of high net worth clients, or those who are closer to you, will receive that information on Monday night, and then on Tuesday they can buy the stock. Let's say you have issued a buy recommendation, which means that when sort of the market sees your recommendation, it will react positively and stock price will go up. But initially, you released this to only a few select clients. They will buy the stock. And then the next day, when this information is released to everyone, then people will start buying and stock price will go up. So what's happened here is that the people who got the information first, so when making investment recommendations, you have not dealt fairly with everyone. You have given a few people an unfair advantage, right? So this would be an example of, if this is happening, this would be a violation of standard 3B. Okay, so we'll do this standard and then we'll take a break. So standard 3C is suitability, which is related to something I said earlier, but here we are focusing on suitability. So when members and candidates are in an advisory relationship with a client, they must do 3 things. They must make a reasonable inquiry into a client's or prospective client's investment experience, risk and return objectives, and financial constraints prior to making any investment recommendations or taking investment action, and must reassess and update this information regularly. So the point here is that when you are recommending certain investment actions to your clients, those recommendations should not be in isolation. Those recommendations should consider the situation of the client. Obviously, if your client is, let's say, a 70-year-old widow who will rely on the return from investment, like she will retire, you are helping her invest, and then her expenses are covered based on sort of the returns from that investment. Obviously, you will make relatively safe investments for her. On the other hand, if you are advising a rich young person, since the person is already well off and is young, there you can recommend stocks that are high risk but also potentially high return. So the same recommendation does not apply to everyone, and therefore, before making investment recommendations, you need to see what is suitable for your clients. If you are not doing this, then you are violating standard 3C. We should also determine that, so in a way, I kind of covered this, that an investment is suitable for a client's financial situation, and the client will have given you, ideally, from your clients, you should know what their objectives are, what their mandates are, what their constraints are. So in the US context, for example, so when I was in the US, I had an investment manager working, who was helping me make investments. So among my constraints was that I don't want to invest in any financial company. I don't want to invest in any company that deals with alcohol or firearms or so on and so forth. So these were constraints that were coming from me. And then it was the responsibility of the financial analyst to then respect these constraints, because it's my money. So I have the right to tell my investment manager what to do and what not to do with the money, and then judge the suitability of investments in the context of the client's total portfolio. So this means that as investment managers, we also need to know what our clients already have. If my client already has a lot of pharmaceutical stocks, for example, then my recommending more pharmaceutical stocks does not make sense. As in, my job is to try and help the client have a diversified portfolio so that the risk is kind of spread out. So it's my job to understand that in a way that's related to understanding the overall situation, but it's important enough that it's been separately identified. Then the other dimension is that members and candidates, when they are responsible for managing a portfolio, they have to respect the mandate. So what does this mean? This means that, let's say you work at a place like Al Mizan, and and then you have a mutual fund, and you say that my mutual fund only invests in blue chip companies. So in Pakistan, we say blue chip companies. In the US, it might be this is called sort of large cap stocks. So companies that are well known and well established and have been profitable and so on and so forth. So if that's what I'm announcing, I'm saying that this is my mandate, my stocks meet this criteria, and then people putting money in that mutual fund will look at what my stated objectives are for that fund, and they will expect that the fund manager will respect whatever they have said about their investment strategy. Then if I violate that, like on my mutual fund prospectus, I'm saying something, but I'm actually then buying different stocks. I'm buying stocks that do not meet the criteria that I have established, then that's a major problem, right? So that would also then be a violation of this standard 3C. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Uh, let's take a break. So as we said, we'll take a break between 4:30 and 4:45. So we'll take a break now, and we will come back at 4:45. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can just type them out. So when I come back, I will first just look at any comments or questions you have, and then we will continue from here. All right. So see you in about 15 minutes.
Thank you, Arif Saab. And students are requested to be back here on time at 4:45. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. I am back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just looking at the questions. So will you provide this material to us? Yes, as in I think Ms. Sarwat, I think can you just clarify what the
Yes,
students
of
will
course.
get?
We will be sharing the presentation as well as the guidance notes that Arif Saab has referred to. They will all be emailed to you with the case at the end of the session.
Okay, then mosaic theory. So that's a technical question which I explained. So my request is so you can see the notes. I don't want to spend too much time on this again, but between the recording and the notes, you will get as in you can understand the mosaic theory. Then how is the case presentation different from the final round presentation? So Ms. Sarat, if you can answer that.
They are the same in a sense that we will be giving you another case study to the semi-finalists, and you'll have 4 days to solve it or 3 days to solve it, and you'll have to submit a new case presentation to us for the final round.
Okay, and then will the case presentation be solved in the same way as the example you have given? Okay, so what I'm covering is the CFA curriculum, which covers, so basically CFA curriculum is 10 topics. Of the 10 topics, ethics is one important topic. So I'm just taking you through the CFA ethics topic. Uh, Honestly, I've not seen the case presentation, and that is actually deliberate in the sense that uh, I'm covering the content. Exactly what shows up in your case, I don't know, but it will be related to the things that we are talking about. The sorts of violations, like I've talked about, if you do XYZ, you are violating so and so standard. So when you look at the case, you will have to try and identify what ethical violation is taking place, right? So the exact, sort of case or the exact way in which it is presented will vary. So you need to use a combination of what you are learning through this presentation and through the notes that you will read, plus your own common sense. So, and then you will apply that to the case and then come up with the best answer that you can. Um, Yeah, so material, we've answered that. What if there is certain rule of an organization which is unethical? What are we to do in that scenario? So that's a very good question. This we will come to shortly in the sense that when we talk about our responsibilities towards our employer, we will cover this, but it's a very good question. And unfortunately, a real life scenario that we sometimes need to deal with. And then you identify that violation and recommendation.
Oh, that is what me I was when I was responding to the above question with reference to the case, but perhaps he's talking about to you about your presentation, so that was me responding.
Okay, what if there is a certain rule of an organization which is unethical? So I've just covered that. You identify that violation and recommendation. What? You identify that violation?
I
Okay,
think this is exactly what I refer to. This is my response to the above question, so you may ignore it.
okay. All right. All right. Okay, so let's now go back to our presentation. I need to just shut this chat. Okay, so we are now moving to standard 3D performance presentation. When communicate, and remember the larger picture here is our standard 3 is our responsibility towards our clients. So when we are talking about our clients, there is also the performance presentation. When communicating investment performance information, members and candidates must make reasonable efforts to ensure that it is fair, accurate, and complete. Okay. Now, you will notice that some of these standards are overlapping, right? The perspective might be slightly different, but but sometimes sometimes there might be an overlap. In other words, there might be there might be a certain situation which is a violation of multiple standards. For example, earlier we talked about that there should be no misrepresentation. Okay, so misrepresentation is a broad area, but the example that I gave to you under misrepresentation, so somebody is saying, somebody's works at a mutual fund. The mutual fund has done well over the last 2 years, but when we look at the last 5 year performance, that was very bad. Okay. However, the person who is presenting the performance only takes the last 2 years. Okay. So he is misrepresenting. But what he is also doing is he's also violating standard 3D performance presentation in the sense that he is not giving a accurate and complete picture, right? So that particular scenario is a violation of multiple standards. This particular standard focuses on performance presentation, that when you present your performance, you need to present the full picture, not just a partial picture that shows you in a positive light. So provide credible performance information to clients and prospective clients. Avoid misstating performance or misleading clients. So misstating performance would be a clear misconduct. So there you are lying, right? So lying is obviously wrong. And then misleading is sort of the scenario that I described was not lying, but it was misleading, right? I'm just talking about the positive and ignoring the sort of the negative. So basically, I'm not giving the full picture, and by not giving the full picture, I'm sort of misleading my clients. If the presentation is if the presentation is brief, make available to clients and prospective clients on request detailed supporting information, right? Often, so the point here is often we cannot or do not provide a lot of details because most people are not interested in details. But one should always be prepared to share details with clients who are interested or who request. So whenever you provide a summary of whatever you're doing, you need to be able to back that up with details if requested. Okay, and just as a side remark, something that some of you might get involved in, given that CFA Institute works with, is all about investment management, and when you have investment management, you must also report your investment performance. So CFA has actually come up with investment performance standards. So GIPS stands for Global Investment Performance Standards. So there are standards with respect to how investment results are presented. And these are recommended, as in these are not required standards, but just a point made over here that with respect to performance presentation, ideally, investment managers should present based on GIPS. So Global Investment Performance Standards. But for your case study, I really doubt that GIPS will be involved. But the principle that you should present in a fair way, in a way that whoever is reading your report gets a reasonable, complete picture, that aspect is important. Okay, next, preservation of confidentiality. Members and candidates must keep information about current, former, prospective clients confidential unless the information concerns illegal activities on the part of the client. Disclosure is required by law. The client or prospective client permits disclosure of the information. So this is actually very important in our field. Let's say that you are an investment manager and you are advising a particular customer, and you are not just advising them, but you are managing their portfolio. Next day, your client's brother shows up and just casually starts asking about his brothers. Let's say there's brother A and brother B. brother A is already your client and you are working with him and managing his portfolio. Next day, brother B shows up and brother B wants to know how brother A is doing. Okay, in theory, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You can just say, "Oh, they are brothers," and I can share the information. But the CFA Institute is very strict. As in, if the brothers want each other's information, they can share it with each other. You should not be the one sharing, A's information with B. So in our business, confidentiality is very important. Many people don't want to disclose their financial situation to their siblings or relatives or whoever. And if they want to, that's what they should do themselves. As in, we should not be the ones facilitating that exchange of information between family members. However, there are some exceptions, as in if somebody is being investigated, they have violated the law, and the legal action requires that you disclose information, then obviously you have to. Or if the client explicitly says that, okay, you can disclose this information, strictly speaking, you should try and get that in writing. If you get it in writing that you are allowed to disclose information, then you can disclose. Okay, so that's fairly obvious, but it's still, as in this is, I've noticed this being violated quite often. All right, duties to employers. Okay, so now standard 4. Up till now, we were talking about duties to clients. Now we are talking about duties to employers. And, one of the questions that was asked will hopefully get addressed in this segment. In matters related to their employment, members and candidates must act for the benefit of their employer and not deprive their employer of the advantage of their skills and abilities. We should not divulge confidential information or otherwise cause harm to the employer. So this is a very straightforward point that we are in the investment management field. First and foremost, our loyalty is towards clients. So we need to make sure we are doing the right thing for the client. After that, our responsibility is to our employer. Our employer is the one who is paying us. So if we are being paid for 40 hours per week, then we should give 40 hours per week. We are being paid because of all the skills that we have, our skills and abilities. So we need to be fair about it. Just like the employer is responsible for paying us our agreed upon salary on time and so on and so forth. Similarly, we, the sort of analysts, if we are being paid by company XYZ, we need to give our best to company XYZ. We should not, if there are any company secrets, there are any models that are used to evaluate stocks or models that are used by during our analysis. These are company models that have been developed over many years. So there might be copyrighted information, there might be sensitive information, there might be information about our clients. So we are not supposed to to share this outside the company unless we have written permission from the management to do this. Okay, so hopefully this is the loyalty to the employer is fairly straightforward. Okay. Here actually I will mention the question that was asked. What if the employer is doing something that's not right, or asking us to do something that's not right? Okay, then the CFA Institute recommends multiple actions. Like one action, if you are in a particular department and the first thing you should try and do is speak to your manager and see if that can be corrected. So if your manager is asking you to trade based on insider information, right? Your manager knows that you are related to the CFO of a major company and asks you to try and get insider information. So you should politely decline, right? As in we are responsible individually with respect to doing the right thing. So if we are being encouraged to do the wrong thing, we resist and we do not. Okay, so hopefully that addresses the matter. If that does not address the matter, then CFA Institute recommends that you sort of disassociate yourself from that activity or that department. So you request that you get put into another department or another manager, so that you are not in an environment where you are being forced or pressured or influenced in a wrong manner. So you try to change your department. And if that also doesn't work, then then basically you leave. You try to get out of the company and find another job, right? So obviously, depending, like the CFA Institute is not mandating, like CFA Institute doesn't say that you have to leave immediately. That's really up to you, right? You judge your situation at a personal level. I would say that, if the company, you feel that the whole culture is toxic and encouraging unethical behavior, then one should not work there, right? That just is not is not a good environment to be in. Okay. Back to loyalty to the company. So, there are several points here. So, for example, leaving an employer. When you leave an employer, sometimes this is quite a common practice, unfortunately. You might take the list of clients. You might just want to, any software that was developed at the client, any models that were used to evaluate companies. You are not allowed to take those. However, any skills that you develop, so during your sort of, let's say, 3-year work with a given brokerage firm, you learned how to evaluate, companies in the cement sector, for example. Then the skill that you have developed, that you can take to your next job, and then based on what you've learned and your skills and your knowledge, you can sort of create a model over there. So that's allowed. Okay. So, those are some basic points. Next is standard, 4B, additional compensation arrangements. Members must not accept gifts, benefits, compensation, or consideration that competes with or might reasonably be expected to create a conflict of interest with their employer's interest, unless they obtain written consent from all parties involved. Okay, so this is important. The point here is actually hopefully straightforward, that you're already working at a company. You are working, let's say, 9 to 5 regular hours, and another brokerage firm sees that you are doing a very good job, and they say that after hours we will pay you, and you also start, working for us. If there is even a small chance that any other work offered to you might create a conflict of interest, whereby, either work for the other company compromises the effort that you're putting for the first company, or the work that you do for the second company might result in some customers shifting from the first company to the second company. So even if you feel that there is a small chance that there is a potential conflict of interest, then you should get your employer's consent before you accept the other job. And if you are not sure, then that means that there is some chance, and you should sort of get the consent in writing. There are other things where there is absolutely no conflict of interest. So, for example, you work for a brokerage firm, but you are also into fitness, and over the weekends you do yoga classes, or you conduct some other fitness training, and you get paid for that. So it's during the weekend, and it has absolutely nothing to do with your investment management job. Then it's okay. There you don't need to get written permission. But if you feel that there is any potential conflict, then you should get a written consent. And in this day and age, even if that written consent over email is considered okay. All right, so this is additional compensation. Okay, responsibilities of supervisors. Members and candidates must make reasonable effort to ensure that anyone subject to their supervision or authority complies with the applicable laws, rules, regulations, code, and standards. So what this means is that let's say you are at an investment management company and you are now a supervisor. So let's say that you are responsible for the group of researchers that are sort of covering the, let's say the cement sector, right? So it's a big company and there are multiple players in a given sector. Somebody is researching company A, somebody else is researching company B. So you have a team of 4 people working under you, all doing research analysis, right? So you're the lead research person and you are doing, people under you are doing research. So you are the supervisor. So what is the responsibility of you as a supervisor? Let's say that you are you are pursuing the CFA program or you are doing this research challenge, so the code and standards apply to you. The question is, do the code and standards also apply to the people under you? And this might seem counterintuitive, but the answer is yes. And the reason is that when you are in a supervisory position, you are responsible not just for your work, but you are responsible also for the work of the people under you, right? So you need to make sure that there is no violation. As in, you need to have the sorts, as in, you obviously can't micromanage everybody, but you need to have processes, procedures in place. Like if somebody is, engaging in, like you see somebody on your team and he seems to be buying shares of companies in a given sector, and then 2 days later there is this pattern where whatever he buys 2 3 days later the stock price goes up, right? So like in a sense that's benefiting you because your team's doing well, but when you see suspicious behavior, then you need to dig into it and see how, it can't just be a coincidence that every time this guy buys something 2 days later the price goes up. So it's your job as a supervisor to first of all put in the sort of checks and balances that if any unethical behavior or something wrong is taking place, you try and dig into it, you investigate, and if there's something wrong then you catch it. So point being that as a supervisor you are not just responsible for yourself, but you are responsible for your entire team. Okay, then we move on to sort of standard 5, investment analysis, recommendations and actions. And here we have 3 different substandards: diligence and reasonable basis, communication with clients and prospective clients, and then record retention. So what does diligence and reasonable basis mean? So members and clients must exercise diligence, independence, and thoroughness in analyzing investments, making investment recommendations, and taking investment actions. And the second point is that members and candidates must have a reasonable and adequate basis supported by appropriate research and investigation for any investment analysis, recommendation, or action. So here the point again is straightforward. You are a professional. So obviously one aspect is about honesty and integrity and so on. But the point being emphasized here is that when you make a recommendation or you propose any particular action, that has to be backed up with proper work, right? You should have, if you are recommending that a given stock is a buy, your research needs to be thorough, right? You should have studied the stock and you should have studied the competitors and done your industry analysis and done all the work before you make any recommendation. And also your recommendation should be independent. So this links with an earlier standard which we discussed, which was independence and objectivity, right? So this is just adding on that. Obviously, being independent and objective is one aspect, but the aspect that's being added here is that in addition to being independent and objective, you also need to do the hard work, right? Do all the proper analysis before you make a recommendation. And then you should be able to justify that, right? So you should have a reasonable and adequate basis. Just because you say something is a buy, you should be able to back that up. So you should be able to show all the research that you have done, which backs and supports your recommendation. In the guidance, every organization should have some, like this is more at a higher level, but organization should clearly define what diligence and reasonable basis means. If you are using third-party research, like somebody else's work, as long as that third party is a trusted party, so you know that this third party does good quality work, and in your recommendation you can quote this third party that, you know, this part of the recommendation or this study you have taken from them. For example, if you are in the retail sector and you want to sort of determine what the retail sales were for, you know, the companies that you are looking at, and this information comes from a third party, if you have, you know, if you have reasonable confidence that the third party is giving you credible and correct information, then you can use it. But in your research report, you should then, you know, identify that, okay, this aspect of your report or this part of your data is coming from so and so third party. Okay. So anyway, the bigger picture is that you should do your due diligence, you should do your hard work. And when you make your recommendation, you should be able to back it up. So your basis needs to be strong. Okay. Okay. Next, communication with clients and prospective clients. So here the standard is that you disclose to clients and prospective clients the basic format and general principles of the investment process they use to analyze investments, select securities, and construct portfolios, and must promptly disclose any changes that might materially affect those processes. Okay, so the point is that obviously you will have a whole range of clients. Some might be more sophisticated, some might be less sophisticated. So you need to be able to, let's say you have sophisticated clients, right? So let's say that your clients are, you know, large mutual funds. You are doing your research and you are doing your investment research and so on. So, and your clients are people like, you know, Al Mizan, which will then buy or sell based on your research, or let's say many large institutions, they have, you know, investment functions. So with the extra cash, they might make investment decisions based on your research. So you need to be able to justify, you need to tell them what your investment process is, how do you select securities. If you are in portfolio management, where you are creating, sort of combining different sorts of securities to create portfolios, you need to be able to justify how you create those portfolios. So this has to be a well-documented process that can also be well explained. You should also disclose to clients and prospective clients significant limitations and risks associated with the investment process. So if you ever look at, you know, mutual fund prospectuses or, you know, other sort of documentation related to particular investments, you will always see a segment on risks. And that's because in many places it's a requirement. Whenever you make an investment, there are always risks. And you, like, there are some investments that are potentially high return investments, but then they also, those high returns come with, you know, higher risks. So your job is always, whenever you make recommendations, not just to highlight the positive that, okay, this looks like a great investment, potentially the returns are high, but as professionals, we also need to show the other side that, okay, potential returns are high, but when the potential returns are high, the risk is always there. Just as a side remark, since obviously, you know, this is kind of the world of finance. If there is an investment that's very high return but low risk, what will happen, right? What will happen is that everybody will buy that. And when everybody buys that, the price goes up. And when the price goes up a lot, then automatically it will become more risky, because if something bad happens, the price will come falling down. So in general, a rule in finance is, or sort of a rule of thumb, I would say, is that when you have potential high returns, or, you know, upside is high, then the risk also tends to be high. And your job is to always highlight that risk part also. Then use reasonable judgment in identifying which factors are important to investment analysis, recommendations, or actions. Include those factors in communication with clients and prospective clients. So you need to, like, when you are speaking to clients, you need to understand what's important to them and what they can understand, and then speak in their language. So if sort of a, sort of uncle and auntie come to you and they want to make an investment, and you can tell that they have very little knowledge of how financial markets work, and then you start talking to them about, standard deviation and, the VAR, value at risk, is this and that. Obviously that's not the right thing to do, right? So when you speak to people, you need to speak in a language that they understand. That is among the responsibilities of a good professional. And the final point is distinguish between fact and opinion in the presentation of investment analysis and recommendations. Right? This is very important when we sort of analyze a stock and we make recommendations, and then we are saying we are making a buy recommendation based on these, factors. Some of those might be facts, right? So it might be a fact that for a given industry, the government is sort of offering some, favorable tax treatment. So that might be a fact. But then, based on that fact, it might be your opinion that, this industry will perform in a certain way, that, let's say it might be your opinion that sales will increase. So whenever you are presenting information, it needs to be very clear what part of that information is actually actual facts. So that should be clear, and where your opinion is coming in, that should be clear. This way, the person reading your report then can sort of understand the difference between what is fact and what is opinion. Okay, so that's the communication. Like in almost any industry, the communication aspect is extremely important, and that's why there is a full section here with respect to communicating with clients and prospective clients. Okay, next standard is record retention. Members and candidates must develop and maintain appropriate records to support the investment analysis, recommendations, actions, and other investment-related communication with prospective clients. So when you get into this work, what will often happen, as in, obviously there will be, good times and bad times. Sometimes you will make recommendations and your recommendations will turn out to be correct, and your clients will make money and they'll be happy. And, when people are making money and happy, then generally, things are fine. But let's say you make a recommendation and then 2 years later, the stock crashes and, the investor loses 50% of his money, right? Then there is a good chance that he will come and he will say, not so pleasant things to you about why did you make, such incorrect decisions? Why did you give me these terrible recommendations? Then what you should be able to do is go back to your records from 2 years earlier and demonstrate how 2 years earlier, based on what was known at that time, you made the best possible decision, right? Or you made the best possible recommendation given what you knew then. And that will only be possible if you have maintained your records in a proper manner. So as professionals, what we are being taught here is that you also need to do a good job of maintaining your records and maintaining whatever communication you had with your clients. And, we are talking here of something, we are talking here about sort of being professional. So this again is kind of related to professionalism, but specifically focused on record retention. Okay, conflicts of interest. This is important. So this is actually out of 7 standards, this is standard number 6. Standard number 7 is something I'll just cover very briefly because that's not something that you are likely to be tested on. So in terms of material to cover, this is the final crucial one. So in our world of investment analysis, conflicts of interest are actually quite common. So let's just understand these. The first point is that you should disclose any potential conflicts. So members and candidates must make full and fair disclosure of all matters that could reasonably be expected to impair their independence and objectivity or interfere with respective duties to their clients, prospective clients, and employer. So members and candidates must ensure that such disclosures are prominent and delivered in plain language and communicate the relevant information effectively. Okay, so I'll give you some examples. There can be all sorts of conflicts. All right, let's say you work, as I've said frequently, you work at an investment management firm, or let's say you work at a brokerage firm. And this brokerage firm does two kinds of things. It writes research reports on companies, and B, the other department actually helps with underwriting. Underwriting means that, let's say that you have a client, XYZ client. XYZ client wants to expand, it needs to raise funds, and you sort of help that client XYZ raise funds. So this raising of new funds is called underwriting. To help a client with underwriting, you get paid, right? In simple terms, if you are helping a client raise funds, obviously the client is going to pay you for that. So you are offering a service, underwriting, for the helping the client underwrite, so the client pays you. Okay. So obviously you have an interest in terms of maintaining a good relationship with this client so that they keep you and you help them underwrite, and then the client pays you, your company, for it. So in this sense, you want to keep the client happy. Okay. At the same time, you have a department that is writing a research report on XYZ client. So in writing the XYZ client, you are supposed to be independent and objective. So if XYZ client is not looking very good in terms of future prospects are not very good, then independence and objectivity and due diligence and all these things that we've talked about, all this sort of dictates and mandates that if the company does not appear to have a bright future, does not appear that the stock will do well, then that's what you should say, right? But if you say that, the company will not be very happy, your client will not be happy, right? So here there is a conflict of interest. One department would like to keep the client happy. The other department actually needs to be honest and independent and objective. So one way to deal with this is when you write your research report, you disclose that this is also an investment banking client. So when you actually help clients, with underwriting, you help them, raise money. That's called an investment banking relationship. So because you are, helping them sort of raise money, right? So in your research reports, if you are writing a research report on a company that you also have an investment banking relationship with, then you should disclose that conflict. This way, people who are reading your research reports, they themselves can kind of see and decide for themselves whether your report is biased or not. Okay, so this is sort of a cross-department conflict. Another situation might be where you are making a recommendation to a client on a particular mutual fund or a particular investment from your company, and you get a commission based on that recommendation. So if your client actually makes that investment, you actually get, let's say, a 1%, referral fee or something, right? Your client should know that, right? Your client should know that when you are making a recommendation, you are also getting a sort of a referral fee. So this way the client can decide, you've told the client that, okay, I think this is good for you, but oh, by the way, I also benefit from this. Then the client can decide whether they want to believe you or not. Your job, like CFA Institute doesn't say that if there is a conflict of interest, don't do it. There is a recommendation to try and avoid conflicts of interest. But in situations where the conflict of interest cannot be avoided, then at the very least, the conflict of interest should be disclosed in a very clear manner. Okay. And by the way, over the years, um, CFA Institute has been pushing most strongly that if there is a conflict of interest, the best scenario actually is to try and avoid the conflict of interest. So if you are sort of getting, a benefit somewhere, then, you should not be also recommending that, because, when you are benefiting from something, then obviously if you are recommending it also, then that is a, that will create a bias and a conflict of interest. Okay. Next is priority of transactions. So investment transactions for clients and employers must have must have priority over transactions in which a member or candidate is the beneficial owner. Okay. So what does this mean? You need to think on a big scale here, and you need to know a little bit about sort of the investment world. The point is that let's say you are a very large firm that buys and sells securities, and and therefore basically your transactions are very large. When you start buying securities, your transaction is so large that when you start buying, the price goes up. And when you start selling, the price goes down. So I'm sure many of you have studied basic economics. When so the demand is up, lots of people are buying. What happens to price? The price goes up. So the same thing can be thought of in the securities market, that if a lot of buying is taking place of a given stock, then the price starts going up. Okay, now a given firm, right? Obviously, you can think of three levels. The firm could be buying securities for clients. Sometimes firms buy securities for themselves, right? So that there are some securities that the firm itself owns, and then there are the individuals like you who work at the firm who know what transactions are taking place, and individuals obviously can buy stocks for themselves, right, or their family members. Okay, now you are at this firm, you are in a senior position, and you know that you have this massive buy order for XYZ company that you will be executing over the full day. And you know that once you start buying and sort of the rest of the world sees that your company, which is very well known, let's say you work for Goldman Sachs in the US, and well known firm in this whole space. When Goldman Sachs starts buying a given stock, the stock price goes up, and you know that, right? So if you don't have any, if you're not following the code and standards and you are sort of self-interested, what you might do is first buy for yourself, and then buy for the company, and then buy for the client. Why? Because when you buy for yourself, first you bought at a low price. Then as you start buying more and more shares, the price will start going up. And when you buy for the clients, you will be buying at a higher price, right? So this actually is a violation of the code and standards. In this case, what you should do is first buy for the clients so that your clients get the best deal. Then you buy for the company if the company is also going to buy those shares. And then the last is you yourself. At the end, you buy for yourself. So this is called priority of transactions. And this also goes back to the code and standard, the code of ethics, where we said that we first, give priority to the clients, and then to the employer, and then to ourselves. So this is just a practical aspect or a practical manifestation of that principle, that we first look at our clients, look at what's best for our clients, then we look at what's best for the employer, and finally we come to ourselves. Okay. So that point is kind of here. Personal trading is secondary to trading for clients. In most cases, buying for the company itself might not be an issue. The real thing is, you can buy for your client, and there might be the temptation to first buy yourself and then buy for clients. But the correct thing to do, the ethical thing to do, is first give the benefit to the client and then you do it for yourself. Okay, referral fees. Members and candidates must disclose to their employers, clients, and prospective clients as appropriate any compensation, consideration, or benefit received from or paid to others for the recommendation of products or services. So this is kind of logical. So when you are making recommendations to others, and let's say you are benefiting from that recommendation, you are getting a referral fee, right? You need to tell the other person, whoever you are recommending, that you are getting that referral fee. By sharing this information with others, others can then make their own judgment as to whether your recommendations are biased or not. Right? So that's, kind of obvious. Okay, so last part, responsibilities as a CFA Institute member candidate. And again, this part is actually not, I think, relevant from your research perspective. When you are when you actually become a member, you actually sign up for the CFA exam, or you actually become a member of the CFA Institute, then there are certain, things that you need to do. You need to respect, the designation. There are rules around how to use the CFA designation, and so on and so forth. So obviously, that's not going to be on your research challenge. So I'm going to skip this. You can obviously read it if you want, and those of you who sign up for the actual exam will then have to worry about this, but not for your immediate research challenge. So that brings us to the end. I'll just summarize what we have done. So in this session, what we did was we started out just talking about what is ethics, what does it mean, why is it important. Good ethics leads to trust, and trust is essential for any work that we do. In particular, in the investment world, if there is no trust, then the whole sort of investment industry will not work. Then we said that there are seven, then we talked about the code, the actual code of ethics. So there were 6 points that give the guiding principles. And then after talking about the 6 points related to code of ethics, then we said that there are 7 standards of professional conduct. Those 7 standards are shown over here. Each standard has substandards. So under professionalism, for example, we had knowledge of the law, independence and objectivity, and so on. Right. So we talked about professionalism. Then we said that integrity of capital markets is essential. We should not do anything that sort of compromises the integrity of capital markets. Then we talked about duties to clients. So clients come first, and we need to make sure that whatever we are doing keeps the best interest of clients in mind. Then we said that there are duties to employers, right? So under duties to employers, there were several sub points that we discussed. Then specifically, given that this is the world of investment management, when we do investment analysis, recommendations, and actions, so here there were substandards, and the key takeaway from this was that whenever we do investment analysis, it needs to be independent, it needs to be objective, there needs to be reasonable basis. So we need to, do our hard work and be able to justify whatever it is that we are recommending. Conflicts of interest. Here, the first guiding principle is that we try to avoid conflicts of interest. And if we can't avoid conflicts of interest, then we must disclose any conflicts of interest that might exist. And I'll also add that in the cases that you will get, and also in real life, when we deal with ethical problems, sometimes a given issue might actually represent a violation of multiple standards, right? So you need to be aware of that. This is not that like a given problem just corresponds to a single, standard. A given issue might actually correspond to multiple standards. All right, so that is it in terms of what I planned to present. Just for your benefit, one thing that I can do real quickly is I can actually just show you the notes that I'm referring to so that, because obviously in this session, there is a lot that I could not cover. So, but I hopefully you got a sense for the standards. If I were to go into details, then you would get lost in the details. So here I'll just share with you quickly what the notes look like, and I strongly encourage you to read these notes. Those who want to really benefit from this should go through these notes, which Ms. Sarwat will share with you. So if you see these notes, so you'll notice that for every standard, so for example, there is standard 1A, knowledge of the law. So the actual standard is given. What is the interpretation? Then the guidance with respect to that standard. So all the single points mentioned in the spreadsheet, in the PowerPoint, that is explained. So with respect to the standard, what's the guidance? Then what are the recommended procedures with respect to that standard? So, that happens for the standard 1A, standard 1B, and so on. So this is a sort of a heavy document. It's almost 50 pages, but it will give you what you need. All right. So that is it from my end. If you have any questions, go ahead. But I hope that this was beneficial for you. And the real important thing that I would like to see, okay, the research thing is coming up, but as I keep saying to my students, the main thing is that you try and whatever work you do, try and be ethical about it. That's actually the larger purpose here, not as in obviously the research challenge is important and you do this, but if you win the research challenge but you get into your work life and you are not ethical, then that defeats the whole purpose. So the real purpose is to learn these points and to try and internalize them. And regardless of what profession you go into, I would like to, I hope that these, ethical standards you apply in whatever you do. All right, that's it from me. Over to Ms. Sarwat, and if people want to ask questions, they can do that too.
Thank you so much, Arif Saab, for your detailed presentation. And now I understand how much of a strain it is to put everything together in such a small span of time. I would echo what Arif Saab has said regarding ethics being in a long game. Once you establish your reputation as as professionals who are excellence oriented and ethical, it goes a long way. So I hope that you all will put your best effort here and understand the curriculum too with its depth. And thank you all for joining and looking forward to the semi-final on the 24th. And Arif Saab, we can't thank you enough for your effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All the best and good luck to everyone. Okay.
Allah Hafiz, Allah
Thank
Hafiz.
you. Assalamu alaikum. Take care.
Allah Hafiz.